Welcome to Money News, our money news for this month of February 2020. Got a lot of things to go over today because there's a lot of economic and consumer and business news to share, and I'm going to try to take you through some of it. And some we'll drill down on and talk a little bit about. Some will be big scale stuff, and some will be kind of just entertaining, fun stuff. So we have some continuing big news items that are kind of themes through our three-class session this semester in Money News. One is the economic expansion we are in. The 127th month of that expansion here in the United States. And while there are always recessionary headwinds, it is continues to be the longest economic expansion in recorded American history. New jobs being created, while not uniform across all sectors, is still robust. Wage gains are occurring at all levels of the economic spectrum. Here in Southern California, particularly in LA and Orange County, up 4% over a previous year. Among low-income workers, among the lowest income workers, as much of a 10% average increase. Part of that is the economic expansion. So a lot of that is coming in lower income areas. And that's good because we know this about any wage increases in low income earners. They spend the money. They don't have the luxury of putting it in savings or investments. So the money goes back into the economy very, very quickly. And because we're a high employment economy at this time, we have the advantage that some of the minimum wage increases that normally occur by legal mandate, that is employers shedding jobs, is offset by employers needing employees. So that it's an interesting time to do minimum wage increases, but it may be an interesting academic study to see if maybe this is better than in recessionary times, in which higher minimum wage might lead to higher unemployment. Now, any economist can always find some gloom in any party. The economist is the one that takes away the punch bowl at a party. And sometimes the punch bowl needs to be taken away. But what we have, some signs like job openings, listed job openings are now down to a two-year low. And that may just be because you don't need to advertise, people show up. There could be a number of reasons for that. We do know that manufacturing continues to slip. It's nowhere near a robust expansion. In some sectors, even a contraction in the manufacturing sector. But we know the service sector, traditionally that sector that you can't export very effectively, is doing very well. Now, and we know the stock market has done extremely well. Some retailers wish that consumers would be tracking the stock market and be more ebullient in their spending habits, but retailers are doing fair at this time. But there are some signs that American dynamism is in decline. For example, some economists point to the fact that the number of new business startups are at low points. New businesses are not being formed nearly as quickly as in past expansions. That people switching jobs are not nearly as rapid. That is, switching jobs for promotional opportunity is not nearly as fast as in other recoveries. And 3, people aren't moving as much as in previous expansions. Now, the latter may have 2 factors. One, the high cost of housing, if you're moving into high wage areas, may be a net negative for you. And 2, the large corporations are increasingly using non-compete agreements when you sign. And that is that once you leave them, you can't work in that sector for a while. So that reduces mobility and reduces dynamism. We'll see what will happen on the long term. And of course, the population slowing down in general has an effect on how dynamic is the American economy. That's something to be concerned about. We'll see how it progresses. Now we know that we're going through this historic change in trade among countries, particularly among major economies. The US, the European Community, China, Japan, the 4 big ones. We know we're still we're engaged in a soft war with the European Union over their trade policies. The administration prefers bilateral agreements rather than agreements with multi-party. If you're the largest economy, that always makes sense, right? You have more bargaining power. Unless you also have national security interests, you also need coalition partners too. So it's always a balance. Europe is doing better with their trade with the US, so that may prompt the administration to do more intervention with our trade policies with the European community. Now, we have this major battle of the big aircraft manufacturers. We have Boeing in America, and we have Airbus in Europe. And there's great evidence that both the US and the European Union subsidizes those airlines. We won a trade battle in the World Trade Organization that we could legally put on tariffs on European Union imports, and we are doing that. And we are also having Boeing going through a difficult time now, not being able to get their aircraft, one of their major aircrafts back in the air, and not having a month almost unprecedented in recent Boeing history in which they got no new orders. No new orders. And the European community is working up a WTO complaint against the US on subsidization more by state and local governments than by the national government, but it still counts as subsidizations. Of course, we have the coronavirus. People who live out in Corona don't like that name. You can go to Corona, I think, without a problem. But you don't want to be on a cruise ship in Asia. And we know the cruise lines are being hard hit. How hard hit, we don't know. We do know that this, by reports, that this coronavirus is so much more lethal than other recent flu strains, killing between 2 and 3% of those who contract it, which is a level about 10 times or more than the traditional flu in recent years. We know about the Americans getting off the Diamond Princess and now are happily in Northern California and in Texas for another 2 weeks of quarantine. Macau is the biggest gambling area in the world. 4 times greater gambling habit, gambling handle than Las Vegas. 4 times bigger in gambling. And it virtually shut down. And it's slowly coming alive. But the Japanese economy has gone into recession again. Well, has gone into contraction. Needs another quarter to go into traditional recession because Japan has a lot of tourism and other trade with China. The question that many economists are asking, business leaders and national leaders are asking, is how much of an overall impact will this have on the world economy? The consensus is some, but not a devastating amount, but it depends on the industry. There are some industries that are frankly in contraction. They have so much of their manufacturing capability in China, such as toy makers, that they can only supply 1/4 of the recent demand for their product. Apple said that disregard what we forecast to be our revenues and our profitability in this quarter. We're being hurt in two ways from this. We're being hurt in terms of production of our equipment, including the components for the equipment, and we're being hurt in the sales of it in China. China, 760 million people. China with a middle class that's almost twice the size of our middle class, and therefore has that middle class, middle income purchasing power. So we know high tech in many areas can be impacted. And we know that automakers in China, including Chinese automakers, have shut down first for the Chinese New Year, slow getting back up, and even those that are getting back up now have the problem of getting the parts to build to assemble the vehicles. Coronavirus. The general estimate I've heard, it would affect maybe 0.3% of global GMP growth, GDP growth. That would be something that can be overcome, except in certain industries. We'll see. The tourism industry is really hit. Think about this. I think I read, and some of you might have read another figure, but I think we have 3 million Chinese visitors to the United States every year, and they spend 50% more than average tourists. So those businesses that are tourism-based, let alone those that package tours to go to China, are being adversely impacted, at least in the beginning of this year. Let's move on. We've talked before about the very rapid pace of new products coming onto the market and the rapid pace of technological disruptions. AT&T bought DirecTV, and probably is happy that it did, but it's not doing very well. It had a very positive cash flow, so it allowed it to get a lot of cash in from business operations rather than borrowing the money or issuing more stock. But DirecTV is in a major decline at this point. That technology may be a technology that is in the rearview mirror and not in the you don't see to any large extent in the future. We'll see. Now, those who talked about the promise of ride sharing through companies such as Uber and Lyft one time promised that it would solve the downtown congestion problem. It would make getting from point A to point B a lot more easier, too. Well, it may have done that, but congestion in downtown areas and major metropolitan areas have increased. In San Francisco, the average downtown traffic speed has declined by 2.5 miles an hour. I think that's how fast you can go, 2.5 miles an hour, according to a Wall Street Journal report. In New York City, 40% of the rideshare vehicles, including taxis, now drive unoccupied, 40%. And there's been an exodus from public transit because of the convenience of ride sharing. So those at not at the very lowest income, but right above the lowest income including the middle class that use public transit, have opted to a high percentage away from public transit, increasing the cost of public transit, cost to operate. In New York City, the average daytime travel speed south of Central Park is now down to about 7 miles per hour. Now, I've taken an Uber or a Lyft in both Manhattan and San Francisco. We seem to move a little faster, but now there's so many more vehicles on the road. You can see how as ride-hailing goes up, bus and rail goes down, at least according in Chicago. Let's move on. How many of you noticed new self-checkout kiosks in stores? My most recent experience was seeing it at Costco. Yeah. And where did this come from? They're trying to change the technology to make it harder to cheat. Hate to say that, or that's a good thing. Depends how your view is. Probably a good thing. That the way they did it before was the weight of your items. To make sure you're putting an item in, it's increasing the weight as you scan an item, it goes into something, it weighs more, therefore there's an extra item. Well, they found that to be very inconvenient to people, and people would avoid doing it for that reason, or a combination in which that reason is highly cited. So now they're going to an over-the-shoulder way of preventing people from slipping it in the pocket. My son, when he worked for Target in their security, one of the problems they had on their check stands with people would, in cahoots with someone else, they would take an item and raise it over the scanner limit. So it would look to the cameras as if you're scanning, but you're not actually making contact. Now with these 3D are supposed to be able to deal with that. That's why if you go like into a Target, you'll see cameras. It's like you're at the check stand as if you're in Las Vegas. You don't know where they're pointed, but you could see the little camera holders. Okay, that's at Costco recently. Okay, of course housing is a big issue in California. It's a big issue worldwide, really a big issue. 43% of Orange County residents can afford an entry-level house. These are people who already live in Orange County, but 57% can't. In Southern California, rents continue to rise 5%. Remember, we talked about how income is rising 4%. But when one of your major cost components goes up 5%, you can be employed and effectively broke. You're employed, but because of the length of your commute and your purchasing power, you're still not enjoying the good life. And of course, in Southern California and Northern Bay Area, if you would, the coastal areas, rent cost keeps going higher and higher and higher. And California spend a much higher percent of their income on housing than other parts of the nation. Even if you look back to 2017 when one study was done, rising household costs have exceeded the growth in wages, particularly for low-income households. 1.5 million low-income households pay at least half of their income towards rent in California. If we look in homeless in California, one of the major components of homelessness is now is the working homeless person, the person with a job that's homeless. 151,000 in California at least, probably undercounted. How do you count homeless people? Count them on one day within a certain amount of hours. They're concentrated in the Sacramento and the Bay Area, in Los Angeles, in Santa Ana, in the San Diego area. Student debt keeps rising as a higher and higher percentage of debt by young workers. Average debt Graduating seniors at four-year colleges have doubled since 1996. Now the average is in excess of $29,000. And if you look at delinquency, debt delinquency, those who are now considered delinquent on the debt, the highest category of delinquent debts are student loans, followed by credit cards, followed by auto loans, followed by mortgages. Mortgages really relatively low. Now, no one sympathizes with the following category of debtor other than a parent of this type. Many new lawyers are drowning in debt. Professional schools in general are not subsidized by state general fund money. Public law schools, public medical schools, so if they are, they're very minimal compared to undergraduate training. And particularly first-tier law schools in which the debt gets higher and higher and higher. That's just one category of how the cost of higher education is being placed on the backs of young people. Let's move on. Now, in the past few years, past 4 to 6 years, there's been a lot of hospital consolidations and hospital closures, particularly in small communities and rural areas. Has health care provided by those hospitals in the areas they served improved? Well, some initial studies say no, has not, gotten worse. Made the hospitals more profitable. It kept the chains in business, and in some cases quite profitable, but didn't improve quality. But that's not the healthcare story I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the healthcare story about surprise billing. How many of you are aware of the term surprise billing? Okay, let me kind of do some definitions. 41% of insured people had a surprised billing. And let me give you an example. You go into surgery, hopefully you don't have to do that, or an emergency room, and you find after the fact a bill that is not paid for by your insurance because the physician was not in the network. They're not in the network. You went outside the network. The hospital's in the network. The emergency room physician may be in the network, but maybe not the anesthesiologist. Or other care folk in it. May not be the ophthalmologist, may not be their surgical ophthalmological surgeon. Surprise billing. It's a problem that, you know, the political system will eventually resolve by outlawing it and providing, you know, some type of compromise that will get the hospitals from doing that. The American Medical Association, in their Journal of the American Medical Association, in JAMA, had an editorial this past week about that there's a time to take action on this because it can be the type of billing that takes someone just into bankruptcy. It's such a high amount when it's not covered. And if it's not covered, usually you're paying the highest, you're paying what, you know, the hotel business is called the rack rate. You're not paying the discount rate because there's no insurance company beating them down on it. Okay. There have also been some major changes occurring in the energy business. Boy, has there been major changes. Some good for the U.S. U.S. being more and more self-reliant on its energy sources. Other parts of the world, we're finding some major changes. Wall Street Journal today reported about how it's cheaper now in India to do solar power than coal or any other energy alternative. And increasingly, the cost of solar is getting very comparable with the cost of alternatives. And in the areas of the world in which energy is most likely to grow, such as in Asia, solar is well positioned to address the need there. Now, solar is not without problems. And those who are current energy providers of non-solar alternatives, such as coal, such as oil, they can be very much impacted. Matter of fact, this morning in remarks, the Federal Reserve president for the regional bank, Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas, talked about how this is going to be a very tough year for the energy sector in his region. Because one, the coronavirus has an effect upon industry in China and other places that supply to China, and they'll have less energy needs because they're not in business, right? So that will drive down demand. So energy sector continues to have changes. This is the longest lasting other shoe not to fall, and that is the California Supreme Court decisions on California public sector pensions. They had one fall almost now a year ago. They had several other cases they've taken under consideration, but there has been no verdict yet. The general feel is among the press is that they're going to make a decision that will be kind of splitting the baby in half, that public sector employers can change pension benefits going forward but can't change it for those that have been earned going backwards. So that maybe you can make an abrupt change. Let's say you worked for an employer for 20 years, your pension for the first 20 years is guaranteed in the standards in which it was offered, and any changes for the next 10 years, let's say you had 30 years there, would be under the new formula. Others say no, the whole will be protected, will not be protected, but only but the retirees. We'll see when the California Supreme Court comes down on that. But we do know it's not just the public sector that has pension sustainability issues. One of the largest and most, I think, one of the most high-quality newspaper chains in America went into bankruptcy. The McClatchy newspapers that are well known in California for the Central Valley newspapers, Sacramento Bee, the Fresno Bee, the Modesto Bee, as well as papers they bought throughout America. And part of the problem is they've been giving pensions for 75 years, and now they have 10 pensioners for every active employee. 10 pensioners for every. How do you sustain that? How do you, kill your babies for their grandparents, as one union leader would say? It's very tough. We'll talk more about newspapers later on today, but I want to talk about the private sector. Also, I still have this independent contractor law that was passed by the state in response to the California Supreme Court decision, center of great controversy. Newspapers hated it because the way they circulate newspapers to begin with, and the way they use freelancers. Newspapers are always going to be upset about changes in independent contractor law, for sure. But increasingly, the creative communities, small theaters, musicians, writers are complaining about how the laws might affect them. Some employers have tried to adapt. Some think, they can adapt in a sustainable way. Others just are fearful that they're going to not be able to be employed at all. And they will likely reach a referendum vote, perhaps as early as this November. Both Lyft and Uber as well as one of the food delivery services, are circulating a referendum that will no doubt get the signatures because of paid circulators. Let's move on. Financial markets doing decently. Last 5 days up 1.5%. 1 month about the same. 3 months up 8%. Year to date up 4%. 1 year up 21%. So equity markets are still very strong. What's happening this week that might change some of that movement in the markets? Well, one thing is a very good report that came out today. The Builders Housing Confidence Report came out today. And that's the confidence of builders in their marketplace. And it's at a near 11-year high. Near 11-year high. And why is that? Because of low mortgage rates now, and because of low inventories of homes that are not, new homes that are not sold. So that's a good sign. That should help that sector. There's other housing reports that will come out tomorrow and at the end of the week. Walmart will have its quarterly sales earnings. That may be seen as a proxy for the entire discount sector of the retail.
Where are they getting the construction workers to do that? It seems like there's a shortage.
The question is, where do you get the construction workers? And that is, you talk to people that build homes and they say that's a major problem. They've hired, they have programs for ex-offenders that they train people to come out of jail, prisons, and into the workforce. Yeah, that is, but they're optimistic that there's market demand. I think that's what that really report is. Let's move away from the big picture stories to tell you about small ones. Hallmark is betting that people will still buy hard cards as opposed to electronic cards, but they're going to work harder on their stores and on their, they basically merged their card printing service with their store business that's as a way to try to sustain the Hallmark product line. But over time, greeting card revenue, see if I can point this, I have a pointer, is a declining business. And buying cards online still is not a very big business. So it's pretty static. If you add the two lines together, it's pretty static as a business. And that's not generally good if you're a public corporation. You want constant growth. We're also seeing slowness and actual layoffs now in the genealogy marketplace. Ancestry is laying off workers, 23andMe doing the same. People have gone and got their family trees, didn't find any new censuses that have come out. The companies have problems now on trying to find new sources of information to keep people engaged. New people to be on your family tree. When we order foods for takeout, there is a growing chance, still small, but growing chance it will be done from a virtual kitchen. That it will come from a central location that will serve. I mean, if you call into like a Subway that you want to have something for a party, it will come out of a central location now rather than your local Subway. Sometimes one kitchen may serve several different brands, and they're going more into industrial or business park settings. The company that's really hot in the chicken business is Popeyes. They're just killing it. They may be killing their customers too, depending upon how, if you believe what they say about deeply fried food. This is interesting. Big-breasted chickens were in high demand a few years ago. I think we talked about that in another money class. Bigger the better. Now, maybe small-breasted chickens is better because you can put them in a bun. You don't have to cut them up as much. Kind of gross. And Chick-fil-A is looking at having more of their chickens coming from small-breasted animals, poultry. And Beyond Meat is in an experiment with Kentucky Fried Chicken in having Beyond Chicken in your Kentucky Fried Chicken. Doesn't that seem odd to you? But people wanting to go back, stay with Kentucky Fried Chicken, but don't want to have as much as some of the deleterious effects. However, if you fry it, you wonder how much benefit you get. We'll see what happens. But in some of the test markets, it's been tested well. Called Beyond Fried Chicken. Boy, that's an interesting. How many of you have ever gone to Taps in Brea? Well, they're expanding. Matter of fact, they're coming out with a new product line called Taps Fish House and Brewery that will open. Will be a smaller format and will focus more on a smaller menu with similar types of beer selection, craft beer selections. That's always good seeing a local business do well. We can remember, I can remember, that when the first time I got on an aircraft and there was a movie available, boy, that seemed like heaven. And over the years, where that movie and your movie choices have changed, and then JetBlue came out with satellite television so that you wouldn't just have to wait. And when JetBlue did that and gave you more selections, they noticed the number of trips to the restrooms, laboratories, were reduced. People stayed in their seats longer. And the lines probably reduced too, because when a movie was over with, you didn't have a big lineup waiting. So only a few airlines are now keeping with having screens at all, and are encouraging people to view the movie on their own phone or on their tablet, or in some cases, I think Alaska Airlines, you can rent a tablet for $10. Talking about changes, how many of you go to Disneyland in a year? Okay. You must have a grandchild or a child. Or do you just like it? You, okay. It's getting so darn expensive. Look at the amount now. Since 2000, at Disneyland, our Disneyland, here nearby in Anaheim, has gone from the average, the highest price for admission, the peak hour price, peak day price, gone from $43 in year 2000 to $154. $154 per person. And on many days, they have to close down. I mean, they have to close down the admission thing because they have too many. And they're experimenting increasingly with demand pricing, just as like toll roads. The price depends upon the demands, either historical or that day. Let's move on. Retailers. Well, Macy's is going to get smaller. Their workforce is going to get smaller. The number of stores they're closing will be over several years, but they seem to be going that way. Their store count going down. Their stock has declined significantly. Bad news for shopping centers. Bad news, I think, even for shoppers. Pier 1 went into bankruptcy, closing all their Canadian stores, and looking for a buyer as they will continue to operate in a smaller number of stores, about half of what they had in the past. Forever 21 is in negotiations to allow their shopping centers to buy them. Buy us. If you want, if you're going to miss us, why don't you just own us? If you had money in shopping centers, it's possible that it's been a bad year for you. Commercial property values in mall properties as a category has gone down 15% in a year. Now, some large mall companies are buying other mall companies, trying to consolidate. And through consolidations, you usually have the benefits of you can lay off some staff. You don't need two marketing directors. You have one marketing director. You can resolve competition by closing down one shopping center, or only having the pennies in this shopping center and having a different thing in another, so you don't compete. We'll see. But The Economist magazine had an article about, that the likely suspect for malls' declines may be wrong. The likely suspect you find in the media is online retailers. That killed the shopping center. Well, they point to some other things that may be as big. One, large category retailers. Now, some of those large category retailers have themselves gone out of business, but ones like Walmart and Costco and Sam Club have done very well. Have done well. So that's one dagger to the throat of shopping centers. Second one, shopping centers historically have relied upon middle income wage earners. High working income people, and income inequality in that area reduces purchasing power. Particularly, it's not only if you earn less money, it's how much money you have left once you take out housing, medicine, and educational costs. And shopping centers have always been big for selling things and not services. I noticed when one regional shopping center had a dialysis center, I said, boy, that's really a change, and talked to their management, and they said, well, they pay so much, and we won't, we don't care if there's, governmental tax on, we look to how much money comes in rent. So shopping malls, regional malls, and we could see when we went over last semester what's happening, being proposed in Brea, that they're talking about changing around their footprint as well. Bringing in a services component, bringing in a housing component in addition to things that are sold. Let's move on. When I was going through college, I worked in a newspaper. I worked part-time and later a little full-time, and I enjoyed that job. I enjoyed it. But newspapers have been a sick economic entity for years. Even at that time, there was federal legislation passed that were designed to, called the Failing Newspapers Act, designed to allow competitive properties to share facilities and changing the antitrust laws. That helped for a while in big newspapers, but then you got the daily and the afternoon competition would disappear, and then the afternoon papers would disappear, and then the morning competition would disappear in the large thing. Then down to one newspaper in some major centers now, not even that one newspaper, or maybe it's only issued 4 times a week. Warren Buffett loves newspapers. As a hobby, it's like collecting trains for him. Actually, he collects big trains. But he also, I think, does small trains too. But he's giving up on newspapers as an investment. We talked about the McClatchy chain, and they're big. They're a big chain. You know, we talked about the Sacramento Bee, but they also have Kansas City Star, what have you. Fort Worth newspaper, Raleigh, North Carolina, Charlotte Observer, a number across America. And newspapers who have been purchased by oftentimes what is known in the trade as bottom feeder investors, investment companies that come in and take failing businesses and strip their assets, sell off the assets, or encumber them with new debt that they then, you know, basically salvage instead of continue the enterprise. One of the most frequent cost savings is buying the circulation list. And that's what you buy. You buy the goodwill and the circulation list, but you don't buy the pensions. You do an asset sale, but not the people. And you lay off people. You have everyone reapply, and then you have a lesser number of people you employ, and maybe not even the people that used to work at the newspaper. Look at this sector of employment. And it's not a big sector. In 2008, it employed only 71,000 people in America, newsroom employees, in newspapers. 38,000 today. 38,000. Broadcast television holding its own. Digital up a little bit. I mean up. Radio down. Cable holding its own. Now some, you know, particularly from the left, will say this is particularly terrible when you consider who's buying the newspapers and how that will affect the American democracy. But remember, newspapers are partisan first, or they had a certain point of view long before they found a new model, and that was an objectivity model to try to get both Democrats and Republicans to subscribe to the paper. Newspapers will say, media companies will say, you know, it's Google and other social media. They're stealing their product, and we're not getting enough revenue from them, or any revenue from them. So what do you do if you have a college of communications that is the largest in the CSU system? What do you do in training students in journalism careers? What do you do? What do you do? When corporate PR departments, such as those at Facebook, far outnumber newsroom employees on virtually all the newspapers that they'll come in contact with, what do you do? How do you train them? Do you even have a print newspaper? And that's what they're struggling on here at Cal State Fullerton. Now, part of it is that there's still communications jobs. It's just not in newspapers. There's plenty of public relations jobs because of the nature of our economy and the nature of social media. But it's a struggle. I'm saddened by where we are. It's like someone that used to like the horse-drawn carriage and would be very concerned where we are now. I think there's more than that nostalgic to make me sad, but I'm saddened by that. Let's move on. Something that's upbeat. Oh, housing. Housing's always upbeat, right? What can go wrong in housing? Well, let's talk about what's going right. This is the time to buy with a low mortgage rate. You get a low mortgage rate. 30-year fixed loan, 30-year fixed loan at 3.5%. I don't know, when we bought a house I don't know, 20 years ago, or refinance, we were at 7%, and I thought I struck gold. Wow, this is really great. You know, it used to be that if you could refinance at 2% lower than your current finance rate, that was a good decision. And if you plan to stay for at least 5 years, that was a good decision. Now you have 3.5%. So there's money available. It's just, can you get the money? Do you have the income to qualify even at these very, very low rates? So the perennial questions, particularly in California in recent years, comes up. Why is our housing so expensive? And the answer is pretty clear. We don't have enough. We don't have enough dwelling units. Whether the dwelling units are owner-occupied or rentals, we just don't have enough. Governor Newsom, when he ran for election, said we need 350,000 a year or more. I think he's revised now down to about 200,000. That seems to be a consensus among many. We need at least 200 to 250,000 a year in California to keep up with net family formations. That is how you look at the demand side. Someone moving out, looking for a dwelling unit, whether it be rental or ownership. Now, the developers and home builders will say, well, government keeps piling on costs, and it's hard to argue that question, That's true. The California solar mandate in new homes is caused a building or an effort in California to try to get their units approved before the new California law comes into place that essentially requires solar for new homes. And that costs more in the long term. Maybe it adds, home builders say it adds $20,000 to the final purchase price. Others say, well, they'll have lesser occupancy costs because their electricity will be much less, because so much, if not all, of the electricity will come, at least in good times, from daytimes, from the solar. Here's the sad fact. In the past year, in 2019, here in California, we built less than we did in the past. We built less. Instead of building more, we're building less housing. Remember the 200,000 to 250,000 figure? How many did you think we built in California? 110,000. So the unmet demand just increases. Now, there was efforts to say, well, part of the problem is there's not enough places to build in places where people want to live. That is either near family members, but oftentimes near employment centers. There's not enough units. You got to create more places to build, and local governments in California prefer single-family dwellings zoning than multiple. So an effort this year, second year of an effort to increase density in some residential neighborhoods, had a major push in the legislature. It was not successful. If you look at the number of housing permits, you can see over time in various parts of Southern California that it goes up and down. Recessions will bring them down, but nowhere near the need. Nowhere near the need. Whether that be single-family home permits or rental multifamily housing permits. Now you would think with greater need, there would be more building, more sales. But sales basically become flat, essentially flat for a while, because the cost is too high. I mean, even if you can get the financing, you may not have the money to pay the financing. in the long term. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, one thing that is obvious is that Northern California legislators, particularly Democrats, but some Republicans, found a solution. Southern California legislators have not found a solution. Therefore, when the bill was up for a vote, it got almost unanimous approval by Northern California legislators, particularly Democratic and some Republicans. But in the South, it hardly picked up one Democrat. So there was an interesting story in the New York Times on Sunday. It's a sad story. It's a cautionary tale. And it has to do with the city of Lafayette. Any of you know where the city of Lafayette is? Yeah. It's in the Bay Area, nice community. I think it's a community of 20,000. And there was this parcel of land called Deer Hill that a developer bought and proposed to build housing on. And it was going to be, I think, 315 apartments on this land, near major employment centers. Now, it's hard to argue in Northern California, in the Bay Area, there isn't a need for more housing. And where do you build more housing than on vacant property? Where's a better place to build? Particularly vacant property that you either own or you've optioned the purchase of. And we know that a major driver of property is not only of new home sales is local opposition. It is natural that you move into your town, not you, not you, the you who's not in this room that we can castigate. They move into a town and find appropriate housing for themselves and their family, and then 6 months later oppose new housing for the next group in, on the grounds you're going to ruin our neighborhood. Congestion will increase. Yes, it will. Prices will go up. Yes, it might. Yes, they might. The wrong type of people will come in. The wrong type of people. That was you 6 months ago, according to the people 6 months prior, the yous. So there is a city manager, and I got to tell you, next to newspaper people, I love city managers. As a profession. Like any profession, there's some that stink, some that are in jail, some that should have been in jail longer ago, some that should never get out of jail. But most believe strongly in doing a strong ethical job in addressing the needs of their community. There's this man, Steve Falk. And Steve Falk was the city manager of Lafayette. And he could see that the developer's proposal was not going to pass, public scrutiny, even though Falk could see his own family members having problems elsewhere in California finding housing. So he started a set of negotiations to try to find a politically digestible alternative. And he did. He did. He proposed and reached a deal that it could be submitted to the Planning Commission, the City Council, that would reduce that 300 apartments down to 44 single-family homes. So no longer have apartments, you don't have the renters coming in, you have people that will own property. Matter of fact, there'll be a dog park and and a soccer field that would benefit the entire community. So he proposed that. The people who were opposed, most of them were still opposed. Some cited that there would be asbestos problems during its construction. And then there was a group that said, that's not enough. That's not enough units. You don't address the need in our community for housing that working class people can. And everyone decided to sue each other. That parcel is still vacant. The city manager left his job. And who wants to propose a deal when community opposition is so strong? Who wants to run a political suicide mission? Now, The Economist magazine, in a recent edition, said, you know, we are fooling ourselves in the West, meaning the West as opposed to the eastern part of the world. We thought that home ownership is the solution to the problem of housing. Maybe it's time to step back and say, no, housing is the solution to housing, whether it's owner or renter occupied. And the single family home is too heavy of a lift for public policy in order to address housing affordability. You may agree or disagree with that, but we do know one thing, I think: holding our breath and hoping someone else will solve the problem will not solve the problem. And so we'll see how this ends up. Let's leave on this point. Interesting point made by the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, addressing this issue, and that is the issue of why do we have less people in America in the labor force as a percentage than in other countries? Why are we so different? Why are we so exceptional in the number of people in the prime working ages who say they're not looking for a job? Why is that? And there's a couple of different theories. One theory on the right is because our welfare system is so generous. You don't have to work. It's easy street if you're unemployed. On the left, they said the capitalist system just isn't working, and people are withholding their labors. I don't think that's a strong argument. I think you have to eat. So when he was asked in a Senate hearing by a senator who thought his answer would be more of, it's because of the social welfare system in America, that would be the answer. After all, he was appointed by the current president, confirmed by a conservative U.S. Senate. He might have some particular insights. He said no, he didn't think it was a welfare system. As a matter of fact, the welfare system is less of a benefit now than it had been in previous years. Particularly if you look 5-10 years ago, less of an overall benefit for being on the welfare system. So what is it? So what he said. And he also pointed out the number of people who are on the food nutrition assistance has gone down over time. And the amount of the dollars in that are provided in constant inflation, constant dollars, has gone down. So he basically said, It's a combination of things. It is that educational attainment in the United States, which was once the highest, has really fallen relative to our peer. And particularly among lower and middle income people, the level of educational attainment has really plateaued. And that's the key thing for keeping in the labor market these days. He then added, I would say that the opioid crisis isn't helping. And I think if you read into that, you can read into a couple of things. One, when we have dislocations in our economy, such as people in the manufacturing sector that could have a high school education and do very well, have a home, send their kids to college, enjoy life, work hard, no doubt, and enjoy life. There's less of those folks. You have gone from middle income to down to, you've lost the pace in the economy. Maybe initially you refused to take a lower paid job. You're too proud to take a lower paid job. You think taking a lower paid job would prevent you from taking seeking employment for a higher paid job. Or you choose not to move, to seek that same job somewhere else because you have too many ties and you don't want to start all over again. And you have a subset of those folks who got so much into despair and through wear and tear in their body turned first to legal opioids and then to illegal. No matter what the answer is, I think it's an important question. Why do we have a much lower rate of people in the workforce? Look at Germany, Japan, France. Now, the stereotype on Germany is Germans are hardworking people, and they are. But the French, Canadians, the British, and us. Even if you look at just gender, by gender, that the number in the primary has been women increased and then are in a plateau. I don't know. I think it's an important question. I'm going to end on this. I'm ending about 10, 15 minutes early. I'm sorry I ran through it, but I told my wife one time, no one is ever upset if you end early. And if you can make your points in a briefer time, no one is going to resent that. Maybe you will, but I don't think you will. Anyway, I hope we covered items of interest to you. We had some happy items and some sad items. And we'll take another look at many of these items, maybe with a different look a month from now, and we'll add some more. Hope you come back. Thank you very much.